At my wedding reception, my new mother-in-law, Loretta, toasted me, her eyes like silk-wrapped steel, as she leaned in to fix my veil. I saw it, a fine powder dissolving into my champagne. I didn't scream. I smiled, switched our glasses in one fluid motion, and raised mine to the room. 10 minutes later, she was the one on the floor, and my meticulously planned revenge against her family and their company had just begun. My name is Ava Redding, and on my wedding day, I became a widow to a marriage that had not yet lived and a god of a war that had just been declared. The stage for this coronation was the Northcrest Ballroom at Whitmore Hall, a cathedral of old money and new secrets in the fictional city of Graybridge, Westmont. The air was thick with the scent of 1,000 white roses and the low, seductive hum of a live jazz trio. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen constellations, their light fracturing across an ocean of white satin tablecloths and shimmering silverware. It was a scene meticulously designed to convey timeless elegance, a perfect photograph of the Caro dynasty absorbing a new, hopefully compliant, asset, me. At 29, I felt both ancient and brand new in a minimalist sheath of ivory silk that whispered where other dresses would shout. It was a deliberate choice, a statement of quiet strength against the Caro family's preference for loud, opulent displays of power. Across from me stood the matriarch, the source of that power, my new mother-in-law, Loretta Caro. She was the formidable chairman of Caro Dynamics, a woman poured into a bespoke gown of midnight blue that seemed to drink the light from the room. Her smile was a masterpiece of corporate diplomacy, but her eyes, sharp and calculating, were conducting a final, hostile audit of my soul. The moment arrived, as I knew it would, cloaked in the guise of tradition. The master of ceremonies, a man with a voice as smooth as aged whiskey, announced the family toast. Waitstaff moved with silent precision, placing delicate flutes of champagne before us. Loretta picked up 2 glasses from a passing tray, her movements fluid and practiced. She glided toward me, the cavernous ballroom seeming to shrink until it was just the 2 of us, locked in a gravitational pull of mutual distrust. "A private toast, my dear," she murmured, her voice a low purr that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Before the official one, to new beginnings." She offered me one of the glasses. As I reached for it, she leaned in, ostensibly to adjust the delicate birdcage veil that brushed my cheek. Her perfume, a heavy, cloying scent of orchid and something colder, something metallic, washed over me, momentarily eclipsing the buttery aroma of the champagne. It was an invasive, territorial scent. Under the pretense of that intimate gesture, her other hand, the one holding her own glass, tilted ever so slightly over mine. I didn't need to see it clearly. My senses were screaming. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible movement, but against the bright, golden liquid, I saw the ghost of it, a hazy shimmer, a few crystalline grains of powder catching the chandelier light for a fraction of a second before dissolving into the effervescence, a misty contrail of betrayal in a sea of bubbles. My heart didn't pound, my breath didn't catch. The fear that had lived in my gut for weeks had calcified into something hard and useful. Resolve. I did not pull away. I did not gasp. I did not give her the satisfaction of a scene. Instead, I let my lips curve into the serene smile I had been practicing for months. "Thank you, Loretta," I said, my voice steady. Just as our glasses were about to touch, I saw my Aunt Carol approaching from the corner of my eye, her face beaming. Perfect. It was the cue I had anticipated, the piece of random, chaotic luck I had woven into the very fabric of my plan. "Oh, Aunt Carol!" I exclaimed, turning away from Loretta in a movement that felt both spontaneous and surgically precise. I pivoted on my heel, using the gentle sway of my gown to create a brief, silken curtain between me and my mother-in-law. In that single, fluid motion, I placed my tainted glass on the small, high-top table beside us, my hand shielding it from view. As I embraced my aunt, I left a deliberate, perfect crimson imprint from my lipstick on the rim of the glass, a mark of ownership, a target. "You look breathtaking, my love," my aunt whispered, squeezing me tight. "It's all a bit overwhelming," I confessed, my voice a pitch-perfect imitation of bridal jitters. While Loretta's attention was politely diverted to my aunt, her back momentarily turned as she acknowledged the older woman. My right hand moved. It was a whisper of a movement, a snake in the grass. I picked up her untouched glass, the one I had already identified by the minuscule scratch I'd made on its base with my engagement ring earlier that evening, and left mine, the one with the lipstick and the poison, in its place. When I turned back to face her, I was holding her clean champagne. She was now the proprietor of a tainted chalice, marked for all the world to see by my kiss. It took less than 3 seconds. 3 seconds to rewrite the entire script of the evening. I glanced across the room, searching for my husband. Nathan, he was, as expected, completely oblivious. His best man, a boisterous former fraternity brother, had cornered him near the bandstand, insisting on a series of increasingly ridiculous selfies. Nathan was laughing, his handsome face open and unguarded. He was a good man trapped in a terrible legacy, a man who saw the smoke from his mother's fires but refused to believe she was the one holding the match. He saw nothing. He was my weakness and, tonight, my cover. "And now," the MC's voice boomed, pulling the room to attention, "a special toast from the mother of the groom, the esteemed Loretta Caro." A smattering of applause rippled through the hall. Loretta, ever the performer, retrieved the glass from the table, my glass, with my lipstick, with her powder, and glided to the center of the dance floor. She waited for the room to fall silent, her posture regal, her smile unwavering. She raised the flute high, the light catching the crimson stain on its rim. "To the merger of love and legacy," she declared, her voice ringing with false sincerity. She looked directly at me, a triumphant, predatory gleam in her eyes. It was a message. Love was the acquisition. Legacy was the bottom line. I met her gaze and raised my own glass in salute, the picture of a devoted, adoring daughter-in-law. She took a long, deliberate sip. The effect was not immediate. It was a quiet, insidious creep. For a moment, she held her pose, the consummate professional. Then, I saw it, a slight tremor in her perfectly manicured hand. She blinked twice, a rapid, fluttery motion, as if trying to clear a sudden fog from her vision. The jazz trio was playing a soft, meandering tune, but in the focused silence of my mind, I heard another sound cut through the air. From a table near the stage, a guest dropped a dessert spoon. The sharp metallic clatter against the marble floor sounded as loud as a gunshot, as definitive as the tick of a stopwatch marking the end of the first lap. My own face remained a placid mask. I feigned a moment of bridal concern, my free hand smoothing down the front of my dress, a gesture anyone would read as a woman fussing with the intricate lace, but beneath the silk. My fingers found the small, ornamental brooch pinned just below my collarbone. It was cool to the touch. With a practiced, subtle pressure, I depressed the tiny, hidden button on its side. A soft, almost imperceptible click, felt only by me, activated the high-fidelity audio recorder nestled within. Every word, every gasp, every whispered confession from this point forward was being captured, time-stamped, and stored. Loretta's practiced smile began to falter at the edges. She swayed. Just once, a barely noticeable lurch that she corrected immediately. But I saw it, and a few people at the head table saw it. A low murmur started to ripple outward from the center of the room, a snake of sound slithering through the crowd. "Is she all right? Did you see that?" The questions spread like dry fire through autumn leaves. She tried to speak again, to perhaps finish the toast, but the words seemed to have deserted her. Her mouth opened, but only a breathy, confused sound emerged. Her eyes, moments ago so sharp and full of cold fire, were now wide and clouded with a dawning panic. She took another unsteady step, her hand flying to her temple. The carefully constructed facade of the iron-willed matriarch was cracking, melting under the spotlights. I knew I had only a small window before chaos erupted and her handlers descended. With deliberate calm, I walked to a nearby waiter's station. I placed my own flute, full of untouched, sparkling apple cider I had arranged with the catering manager due to a feigned alcohol allergy, onto the tray. I carefully folded a linen napkin and set it beside the glass. Another marker, another piece of my meticulously organized evidence. My glass, clean, her glass, used. The story was being written in objects. Then, I walked toward the eye of the storm. I reached Nathan just as he was turning, his smile fading as he finally registered that something was wrong. The confusion on his face was genuine. I slipped my arm through his, my grip firm, anchoring. He looked down at me, his brow furrowed with concern. "Ava, what's happening with my mother?" I looked up at him, my expression a carefully crafted blend of wifely worry and steely resolve. I leaned in close, my lips brushing his ear, my voice low and urgent, a command disguised as a plea. "Don't leave my side." As I held Nathan's arm, a fortress of calm in the rising tide of panic, the world seemed to slow down. The murmurings of the guests, the frantic gestures of Loretta's personal assistant, the low, confused notes from the jazz trio, it all faded into a dull roar. In its place, memory surged forward, sharp and cold, providing the context for the chaos I had just unleashed. This perfect family, this perfect brand, was a meticulously crafted illusion, and I had spent the last 6 months studying its every crack and fissure. Caro Dynamics was not just a company, it was the financial and social bedrock of Graybridge, a publicly traded medical logistics behemoth. It specialized in the transport of sensitive biomedical materials, vaccines, transplant organs, clinical trial samples. Its reputation was built on a single, unassailable promise: the integrity of the cold chain. Loretta Caro, a widow who had inherited the CEO title and transformed the regional firm into a global player, was its public face. The media adored her. She was the Iron Orchid, a feminist icon who graced magazine covers, championing women in STEM while ruthlessly crushing her competitors. She was a brand, a perfect narrative of strength and resilience, and every perfect narrative requires a villain. She had simply chosen the wrong one. My life intersected with this dynasty not at a charity ball, but in a server room. I was a data security consultant, a digital ghost who slipped into corporate networks, identified their vulnerabilities, and vanished after hardening their defenses. Caro Dynamics hired my firm to audit their system after a minor data breach. That's where I met Nathan. He wasn't the arrogant heir I'd expected. He was the chief innovation officer, genuinely brilliant and passionate about the technology, but insulated from the company's darker operational realities. Our romance bloomed over encrypted emails and late-night system diagnostics. It was a story the Caro PR department couldn't have written better. The tech genius scion and the brilliant security expert who breached his firewalls and then captured his heart. It was clean. It was modern. It was a marketable lie. From the beginning, Loretta treated me with a proprietary warmth that felt like being appraised. She called me her clever girl. It sounded like a compliment, but it felt like a label, a classification. When she said it, her eyes weren't warm. They were scanning me, calculating my value, my potential threats, my assets. I was a clever girl for having secured her son, for having a spotless public record, for understanding the complex world of data he inhabited. I was a valuable acquisition, and Loretta always protected her assets until they became liabilities. The first tangible proof of my status as a conditional asset came in the form of the prenuptial agreement. It was delivered by a junior lawyer from the Caro's in-house legal team, a document thick enough to stop a bullet. Most of it was standard boilerplate for a high-net-worth marriage, but buried deep within the legalese was a clause so specific, so venomously precise, it made the air in the room feel thin. Clause 48B. It stipulated that if the marriage was terminated due to a moral or ethical scandal, publicly attributed to either party within the first 48 hours of the wedding ceremony, Any and all promised shares in Caro Dynamics, my wedding gift, would be rendered null and void. The clause was a weapon waiting for a trigger. It wasn't a shield. It was a preloaded gun pointed directly at my head. It was designed to neutralize a threat before it could even speak. As our wedding date approached, whispers grew louder in the financial sector. A rival corporation, a ruthless private equity firm known for hostile takeovers, was circling Caro Dynamics. They were sniffing for weakness, for any crack in the company's pristine image that could drive the stock price down and make it vulnerable. A messy family scandal, say, a bride having a hysterical, drunken breakdown at her own wedding reception, would be more than enough to spook investors and give the sharks the blood they smelled in the water. Loretta's entire empire was balanced on the knife's edge of public perception. I found the crack not in the market, but in Loretta's own hard drive. During a final security integration I was performing remotely, I stumbled upon it, a hidden partitioned directory. Inside was a single file, innocently named Orchid XLSX. My blood ran cold when I opened it. It was a spreadsheet containing 2 sets of data logs for their cold chain shipments over the past 18 months. One set showed the real-time temperature readings from the transport units, dotted with red flags, spikes and dips outside the safe zone, periods where the cooling systems had failed, deliveries that were compromised. The other set was a flawless, pristine log of perfect, uninterrupted temperature control. It was a simulation, a forgery. They weren't just fudging numbers for internal reports. They were delivering potentially compromised medical supplies and using faked data logs to certify their integrity. It was a scandal that would not just tank the company stock. It would send people to prison and destroy lives. My first instinct was to show Nathan. I cornered him in his home office, the damning spreadsheet glowing on my laptop screen. His reaction was not outrage, but fear. Fear for his mother. Fear for the legacy. He went pale, his eyes darting around the room as if the walls were listening. "There has to be an explanation. Ava," he'd stammered, running a hand through his hair. "Maybe it's a simulation for a new system, a stress test." "Nathan, these are logs for real shipments. I've cross-referenced the consignment numbers. They match actual deliveries." He sank into his chair, his defense mechanisms kicking in. "Someone must be setting her up. A blackmailer. Yes, that's it. She told me someone was trying to extort the company. She's probably building a case against them, keeping a record of their threats." He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "My mother is protecting the company. Ava, that's all she's ever done." In that moment, I understood. Nathan was a good man, but his love for his mother was a blindfold he had tied on himself. He saw the smoke, but he would never, ever believe she was the one holding the match. And I knew, with chilling certainty, that if I forced him to choose, he might choose the comforting lie over the devastating truth. I would be discredited, painted as the hysterical, vengeful girlfriend, the clever girl who got greedy. So I closed my laptop and my mouth. I told him he was probably right, and that night, I began my own war. I worked silently, meticulously. I set up a layered, encrypted backup of Orchid, XLSX, and every related file, storing it on a secure, off-site server. I used my knowledge of their internal communication system to capture audio recordings of key conversations, Loretta and the CFO discussing how to mitigate the data anomalies, a conversation that was less about fixing a problem and more about burying the evidence. I became a ghost in their machine, collecting the ammunition I would need to survive the blast that was coming for me. The final declaration of war came 2 nights ago, at the wedding rehearsal dinner. The affair was held in a private room at an obscenely expensive restaurant. After Nathan had gone to speak with his father, Loretta cornered me by the terrace, the city lights of Graybridge glittering behind her like a web of captured stars. "You've been quiet lately, Ava," she said, her voice smooth as glass. "Contemplative." "A lot to think about," I replied, keeping my tone light. She took a step closer, her orchid perfume a suffocating cloud. Her smile was gone, replaced by a look of cold, hard appraisal. "This family, this company, requires a certain alignment of priorities. Sacrifices must be made for the greater good. Do you know what it means to obey for the sake of the family, child? The condescension, the undisguised threat, it was all there. She knew I had found something. She didn't know what, exactly. But she knew the clever girl had gotten too clever. She was giving me one last chance to fall in line, to become another one of her silent, loyal assets. I looked her directly in the eye, letting all the pretense fall away. I let her see the steel she had spent months trying to ignore. "I don't know much about obedience, Loretta," I answered, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of the data on my servers. "But I know what it means to have justice before publicity." Her eyes narrowed. The subtle shift in her expression was my confirmation. She understood. I was no longer a potential asset. I was a liability to be neutralized. Clause 48B was now active. The 48-hour clock would start the moment I said, "I do," and the powder in the champagne was meant to be the trigger. Back in the ballroom, the memory dissolved, replaced by the sharp, immediate reality. Loretta was now leaning heavily on a bewildered-looking uncle, her face pale, her breathing shallow. Nathan was still beside me, his hand gripping my arm now, his knuckles white. The illusion of the perfect family brand was bleeding out on the white satin tablecloths, and I was holding the knife. The chaos in the North Crest ballroom was a symphony of Loretta's design, but she had written herself into the wrong part. As I stood there, a calm anchor in the swirling eddy of my husband's confusion and the guests' alarm, my mind was not on the scene before me. It was running a cold, clean, logical diagnostic of the plot that had just backfired in its architect's face. This was not a crime of passion. It was a corporate strategy executed with a chemical catalyst. The powder was never meant to kill me. Loretta Caro was many things: a narcissist, a fraud, a corporate predator. But she was not a murderer in the conventional sense. Murder is messy, unpredictable, and leaves a trail of vulgar evidence. Loretta's methods were always about control, about shaping perception. No, the powder wasn't poison. My research, conducted weeks ago through a discrete chemical analysis of a residue I managed to lift from her desk blotter, confirmed my suspicions. It was a low, concentrated dose of a fast-acting benzodiazepine, not enough to cause permanent harm, but more than enough to induce a state of acute confusion, slurred speech, loss of motor control, and emotional volatility. It was a performance-enhancing drug, designed to enhance a performance she had already scripted for me. In her narrative, I was to be the hysterical bride, the beautiful, but unstable, gold digger who couldn't handle the pressure of marrying into the Caro dynasty. The benzodiazepine would have simply ensured my performance was convincing, in front of 100 smartphones and the lens of a trusted photographer on her payroll. I would have stumbled, wept, perhaps lashed out. I would have become the living embodiment of the moral or ethical scandal, so artfully described in Clause 48B of our prenuptial agreement. The formula was brutally simple: one viral video of a bride's public meltdown, plus one ironclad legal clause, equals the complete and utter neutralization of Ava Redding. My shares in Caro Dynamics would be voided. My access to the family's inner sanctum revoked, but more importantly, my credibility would be annihilated. Who would believe the ravings of a disgraced, unstable woman? If I tried to speak about a file named Orchid XLSX, I would be dismissed as a bitter, vengeful ex-fiancé, a classic case of a woman scorned. The truth would be buried under the much more compelling, much more shareable story of my spectacular collapse. Loretta's plan was timed to the second. The toast was at 8:40 p.m. The drug would have been in full effect by 8:50. The meltdown would have been captured and packaged by 9 o'clock. And at precisely 9:10 p.m., an exclusive leak would have been delivered to a notoriously unscrupulous gossip columnist who had long been on the Caro payroll. I knew this for a fact. 2 weeks ago, while waiting for Loretta in her executive office suite, her assistant had stepped away from her desk, leaving her phone unlocked. It was a moment of foolish carelessness. On the screen was a draft email, addressed to the columnist. The subject line was, "Exclusive, Caro Wedding Drama." The body contained a pre-written narrative of the bride's unfortunate and deeply concerning episode. And at the bottom, I saw the scheduled send time, 9:10 p.m. It was a digital smoking gun. Her attack was designed to be two-pronged, a pincer movement to trap me completely. The public spectacle was only the first wave. The second was quieter, more clinical. With me sedated and incoherent, Loretta would have played the part of the concerned, heartbroken mother-in-law. She would have guided a distraught Nathan into signing a press release, a statement full of carefully chosen words like privacy, exhaustion, and seeking immediate medical support. I wouldn't have been taken to a hospital. I would have been quietly shuttled to a private wellness clinic, one of those discreet, high-end facilities where wealthy families send their problems to disappear. My phone would be taken away for my own good. My access to laptops and any form of outside communication would be severed. I would be cut off, isolated, and legally declared incapable of managing my own affairs while under their care. All of this was designed to run out the clock. The infamous 48-hour window in the prenup was her shield. Once that time had elapsed, with me safely silenced and discredited, she would have called an emergency meeting of the Caro Dynamics Board of Directors. The agenda: managing the fallout from the family crisis. She would have presented herself as the stoic leader, forced to make a difficult decision to protect the company's reputation from her new daughter-in-law's instability. It would have been a masterclass in corporate theater. And then would come the real prize. The scandal, though quickly contained, would inevitably cause a temporary dip in the company's stock price when the markets opened on Monday. It would be a small, manageable tremor, and in that moment of manufactured weakness, a private family trust, controlled by Loretta, would execute a series of pre-planned buybacks, snapping up shares at a discount. It was a move designed to do more than just make a profit. It was designed to consolidate her power, increasing her voting bloc and making her position as chairman unassailable, just as the threat of a hostile takeover loomed. It was a brilliant, sociopathic maneuver. Use a personal attack to create a financial opportunity. In this intricate machine of deceit, I was the final, unpredictable component. I was the ghost in her server, the one person outside of her small circle of co-conspirators who knew the truth about the cold chain data. Orchid, XLSX, was a time bomb, and she knew I had the detonator. Therefore, I had to be diffused. I had to be tainted, smeared, and broken before I could ever have the chance to speak. The character assassination was a prerequisite for the corporate cover-up. This was Loretta's playbook, her fundamental rule of engagement. The philosophy that had guided her ascent was that truth is irrelevant. Victory belongs to whoever tells the most compelling story. She didn't deal in facts. She dealt in narratives. She had built a global corporation, a personal brand, and a family dynasty on a foundation of meticulously crafted fictions. My rule, the one I had adopted as a survival mechanism, was the inverse of hers. I would win by meticulously documenting her story and then presenting the cold, hard, verifiable truth. She created myths. I created evidence logs. She painted pictures with words. I took screenshots with timestamps. My entire counteroffensive was built not on a better story, but on a body of proof so absolute, so undeniable, that it would shatter her narrative to dust. And so, the fine white powder dissolving in a champagne flute was never the real weapon. It was merely the percussive cap, the small, almost insignificant element designed to initiate the main charge. It was the spark she intended to use to start a fire that would consume my reputation, my freedom, and my future. But in her hubris, she failed to see that I had already laid my own charges. The powder was indeed a catalyst, but not for my destruction. It was the starting gun for the public execution of her lies, and the detonation of a data bomb that would rock her entire world to its foundations. Loretta's plan was a blunt instrument, designed for a single, concussive impact. Mine was a web, woven over weeks, with interlocking threads of technology, legal strategy, and human fallibility. A bride is supposed to spend the weeks before her wedding tasting cakes and finalizing flower arrangements. I spent them building an arsenal. My war room was not a corner office, but the encrypted partitions of my laptop, and my soldiers were assets and contingencies. My first and most crucial recruit was my best friend, June Park. June doesn't believe in fate. She believes in frequencies and flawless audio engineering. 2 weeks before the wedding, I met her in her sound studio, a cavernous space that smelled of ozone and old coffee. I didn't give her the whole story. I didn't need to. I told her I was marrying into a powerful family and wanted an insurance policy. June, who had seen me through the corporate espionage trenches before, simply nodded and got to work. The result was the brooch on my dress. To the world, it was an antique platinum piece with a small sapphire. To us, it was a custom-built microphone with a geotag and a time-stamped recorder. Its feed routed through a microtransmitter to a private, encrypted cloud server she would be monitoring in real time. It was my voice, my truth, made immutable. Next, I addressed the visual narrative. Loretta would have her own photographer, a society darling who knew which angles flattered the Caros and which moments to conveniently miss. I needed my own eyes. I hired a second photographer, a young, hungry photojournalist I found through an industry acquaintance. His contract was with me personally, not the Caro wedding account. His instructions were specific. He was to focus on candid, unposed shots of the head table. Every photo he took was to be wirelessly and instantaneously uploaded to a separate, secure server under my control. He was my unbiased lens, my second witness, tasked with capturing the truth. Loretta's photographer was paid to ignore. While June and my photographer were securing the present moment, I was fortifying the past, the data bomb. Orchid, XLSX, and the server logs that corroborated it were too powerful to keep in one place. I engaged a boutique law firm in Riverside, California, crucially, outside of Westmont state jurisdiction and beyond the immediate reach of Loretta's legal cronies. I sent them the complete data package, not as a client file, but as a digital escrow. Their instructions were written in the cold, precise language of a last will and testament. The escrow was to be released in full to both the Securities and Exchange Commission and the FDA upon one of two conditions: my confirmed death or medical incapacitation, or my failure to transmit a specific alphanumeric code to them by 11 o'clock p.m. on my wedding night. It was my dead man's switch. With the legal failsafe in place, I armed the public one. I compiled a summary of my findings, complete with a few key, redacted data points from Orchid, XLSX, and a transcript of Loretta's most incriminating phone call. I addressed it to Michaela Vance, the most dogged investigative reporter at the Northbridge Post, a woman with a reputation for breaking stories that ended careers. I wrote a simple, direct email. Ms. Vance, what you see here is the tip of an iceberg that threatens public health and defrauds investors. If I do not cancel this email by 10:30 p.m. tonight, the full, unredacted data set will be delivered to you. The story is yours. I saved it in my drafts and used a third-party service to schedule it for 10:31 p.m. A ticking clock only Loretta couldn't hear. With the digital traps set, I turned my attention to the physical battlefield. The ballroom itself, 3 days before the wedding, during the final walkthrough. I spoke privately with the catering manager. I told him I had a rare, stress-induced allergy to sulfites found in champagne and that a reaction on my wedding day would be a disaster. I was charming, apologetic, and slipped him a generous cash tip. His discretion was assured. He promised that all champagne flutes delivered to me personally would contain a specific brand of sparkling apple cider that was nearly identical in color. It was a simple, elegant solution that removed the primary variable, the liquid itself. The next step was controlling the delivery system. That evening, I feigned a headache and went to the ballroom, which was being set up. I found the crate of champagne flutes reserved for the head table. In the quiet solitude of the vast, empty room, I took out my diamond engagement ring, the Caro family heirloom, Nathan's grandmother's stone. I found the glass meant for Loretta, identifiable by its slightly heavier base, and etched a tiny, almost invisible scratch near the bottom of the stem, a mark only I would recognize. From that moment on, I knew which glass was hers, I could track it, and if necessary, I could swap it. I had taken control of the weapon. The seating chart was my next move. Under the guise of bridal preference, I rearranged the head table. I placed Loretta directly opposite me, ensuring a clear, unobstructed line of sight. I then positioned the table in the ballroom so that my hired photographer's designated position gave him a perfect 45-degree angle shot of both of us. Any interaction, any exchange of glasses, would be captured perfectly. The human elements were the most unpredictable, but they needed to be managed. Nathan was the biggest variable. I couldn't tell him the truth, but I could give him a simple, clear instruction that would serve my purpose in a moment of chaos. Just before I walked down the aisle, as the music began to swell, I sent him a text message. Feeling a little overwhelmed, if anything strange happens tonight, just promise me you'll stand on my right side and hold my hand. Don't let anyone pull us apart, please. It was a message a nervous bride would send, a plea for reassurance, but it was also a strategic command. In the event of an emergency, his physical position was to be one of solidarity with me, a visual cue for everyone in the room. My final piece of improvised surveillance was a gift. The best man's father was a known tech enthusiast, a man who loved spy gadgets and novelty electronics. For his wedding gift, I gave him a beautiful, weighty fountain pen. I told him it was a special edition with a built-in 4K video recorder. He was delighted, like a boy with a new toy. I knew he would be eager to test it out, and his seat at the head table gave him a direct view of Loretta. He became my third camera, an unwitting ally in my intelligence-gathering operation. With all the pieces in place, I made one last check. I slipped away from the pre-ceremony photographs and walked the path from the ballroom to the small conference room behind the stage. The hotel staff called it the Hemlock Suite. It was a small, quiet space with its own secure Wi-Fi router. I checked the signal strength on my burner phone. It was strong. This would be my command center, the place from which I would launch my counteroffensive if necessary, an escape route and a broadcast booth, all in one. I returned to my bridal suite. The web was complete. Every contingency was planned for. The audio evidence, the photographic proof, the legal failsafe, the media time bomb, the physical control of the environment, and the subtle manipulation of the key players. Loretta was walking into a wedding reception. I was walking onto a meticulously prepared battlefield. The board was set. The pieces were in position. All that was left was to walk down the aisle and let the queen make her move. The moment stretched, thin and humming, like a high-tension wire about to snap. Loretta's perfectly manicured hand, the one that had held the champagne flute, clawed at Nathan's tuxedo jacket, her knuckles a stark white against the black fabric. She didn't fall, but she staggered, a jarring, graceless lurch that sent a shockwave through the room. The low hum of conversation didn't just stop, it was sucked out of the air, replaced by a sudden, sharp intake of collective breath. A wave of whispers rose to fill the vacuum, urgent and sibilant. What's wrong with her? Did she drink too much? Nathan's face was a canvas of confusion and dawning alarm. He instinctively wrapped an arm around his mother's waist, steadying her. "Mother, are you all right?" His voice was a low, concerned rumble, but it was swallowed by the rising tide of speculation. This was the moment of decision, the point where chaos could either consume the evening or be harnessed. While Loretta's assistant began to push through the crowd, her face a mask of professional panic. I moved. I stepped forward, not toward Loretta, but toward the band leader. I caught his eye and gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of my head, followed by a subtle, calming gesture with my hand. He understood immediately, his professionalism a small, solid rock in the churning sea. He turned to his musicians. The nervous, trailing notes of the jazz piece they had been playing faded away, replaced by a soft, instrumental ballad, a gentle melody designed to soothe and fill the awkward silence. Then, I turned to the MC, who stood frozen by the stage, his microphone held limply in his hand. I walked to him, took the microphone with a firm but gentle grip, and addressed the room. My voice was calm, clear, and carried a note of serene, bridal authority. "If I could have your attention for just a moment," I began, a warm, reassuring smile fixed on my face. "It seems the excitement of the day has been a little overwhelming for my wonderful new mother-in-law. We're just going to take a brief, 10-minute intermission. Please, enjoy the music, have another drink, and we will resume the festivities shortly." It was a perfect corporate statement, calm, vague, and utterly dismissive of the unfolding drama. I had seized control of the narrative, before Loretta's assistant could reach her, before Nathan could fully process what was happening. I was at Loretta's side. I placed a hand on her free arm, my touch a perfect imitation of daughterly concern. "Let's get you some air, Loretta," I murmured, my voice pitched for her and Nathan to hear. "A little quiet will do you good." I began to guide her away from the dance floor, toward the discreet exit behind the stage. Her assistant, a harried-looking woman named Claire, finally broke through. "Mrs. Caro, let me help." "I've got her," I said, cutting Claire off with a smile that was pure, polished steel. "You stay here and make sure the guests are comfortable." It was an order disguised as a request, and Claire, conditioned to obey the alpha in any room, froze and nodded. I was isolating my target. Nathan, still supporting his mother, moved with me. "Ava, what do you think it is? Her heart?" "I think she's just overstimulated," I said smoothly. "The lights, the noise, let's just get her somewhere quiet." We entered the narrow corridor behind the stage. The moment the door swung shut, the soft music of the ballroom was cut off, replaced by an immediate, ringing silence. We were in the backstage, a liminal space of stacked chairs and coiled cables. I guided her into the Hemlock Suite, the small conference room I had scouted earlier. It was sterile and impersonal, smelling of faint disinfectant and old paper. I flicked on the overhead fluorescent lights. They hummed to life, casting a harsh, unflattering glare that stripped away the romantic haze of the ballroom. There were no chandeliers here, no soft focus, only the stark, cold truth. The moment the door clicked shut behind us, Loretta wrenched her arm from my grasp. The drug had clouded her mind, but the core of her predatory instinct was fighting its way through the fog. She leaned against the polished mahogany table in the center of the room, her breathing ragged. She looked at me. Her eyes narrowed, the confusion giving way to a dark, dawning suspicion. "You," she rasped, the word a shard of glass. "What did you do?" I stood by the door, a picture of calm. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I let the silence hang in the air for a beat before I delivered the first blow. "I didn't drink from that glass. Loretta." Her eyes widened, her gaze flickered down to the champagne flute she was still clutching in a death grip, and there, on the crystal rim, was the damning evidence, a perfect, crimson crescent, my lipstick, the mark of the intended victim, now staining the hand of the perpetrator. The realization hit her like a physical impact. It wasn't that I had done something to her glass, it was that she had drunk from mine, the trap she had set for me. She had walked into herself. A flicker of pure, unadulterated hatred ignited in her eyes, burning through the chemical haze. Before she could form a coherent response, I reached into the small, beaded purse that hung from my wrist. I pulled out a single, folded sheet of paper and placed it on the table in front of her. It was a printed copy of the draft email from her assistant's phone, the one scheduled for 9:10 p.m., the one detailing my unfortunate and deeply concerning episode. She stared at it, her mind clearly struggling to process the text, but her eyes snagged on the recipient's name, the gossip columnist, and the scheduled time. As she was staring at the paper, a soft vibration came from my purse. I slipped my personal phone out. The screen was lit with a single, encrypted message from a number I knew by heart. It was from June. The message contained only 3 words: "Package is live." It was the confirmation. The digital escrow had been activated. The complete, unredacted ORCID XLSX file, the server logs, and the audio recordings were now securely in the hands of the Riverside law firm, awaiting the final trigger. My dead man's switch was armed and ready. Loretta looked up from the email, her face a mask of disbelief and rage. "You wouldn't dare!" "You taught me to always have a contingency plan," I said, my voice even, "to protect my assets." I unlocked my phone, navigated to an audio file, and turned the volume up. I didn't place it on the table. I held it. It was my weapon now. I pressed play. Loretta's own voice filled the small, silent room, tinny and sharp from the phone's speaker. "The anomalies are unacceptable," her recorded voice said, crisp and cold. "We don't fix the data. David, we clean it. We replace the entire log. I want a flawless record. No deviations, no questions. Bury it." It was a short clip from her call with the CFO. The most damning 8 seconds I had. The command to falsify the cold chain data, in her own voice, was now hanging in the air between us. That was what broke her. The sight of her own digital ghost, her own words turned against her, shattered the last of her composure. With a strangled cry of rage, she lunged forward, not at me, but at the phone. Her hand shot out, her nails like claws, intending to snatch it, to smash it, to silence her own voice. Her fingers were inches from the screen when the door to the room swung open. Nathan stood in the doorway. His face was pale, his eyes wide, no longer confused but filled with a terrible, dawning comprehension. He had clearly heard his mother's voice coming from the phone. He had seen her lunge. He took in the scene in a single, sweeping glance. His mother, wild-eyed and snarling. Me, standing calm and resolute, holding the phone out of her reach. The damning email printout on the table between us. Loretta froze, her hand hovering in midair. She turned to her son, her expression shifting instantly from rage to a desperate, pleading victimhood. "Nathan, she's lying. She's trying to destroy us. This clever little witch is—" "Mother," Nathan said. His voice was quiet, but it cut through her tirade like a surgeon's scalpel. It was a voice I had never heard him use with her before. It was the voice of a man, not a boy. He took a step into the room, his eyes locked on hers. He stood to my right. He took my hand. He didn't look at me. His full attention was on the woman who had, until this moment, held his entire world in her palm. "Mother," he repeated, his voice harder now. "Stop." The word, so simple, so final, hung in the air. It was a judgment. It was the sound of a dynasty breaking, the sound of a blindfold being torn away. Loretta stared at him, her mouth agape, the fight draining out of her. In that moment, she looked old and frail and utterly defeated. I had won the private war. Now it was time for the public execution. I squeezed Nathan's hand once, a silent acknowledgement. Then I let go. I switched off the recording on my brooch. I turned my back on the wreckage of the Caro matriarchy in that small, sterile room. I walked to the door, my steps steady, my purpose clear. The soft, melodic sounds of the ballroom grew louder as I approached. It was my stage now. I was no longer the bride. I was the narrator, and I was about to tell a whole new story. I opened the door and stepped out, into the light. Stepping back into the ballroom was like breaking the surface of water. The sound rushed back in, a low, anxious murmur, the soft, noncommittal melody of the band. But the atmosphere was thick with tension. Every eye in the room snapped to me as I emerged from the shadows of the backstage corridor. I walked with a purpose that felt both alien and intimately familiar. This was not the blushing bride they had applauded an hour ago. This was someone else. I didn't hesitate. I walked directly to the MC, who was hovering uselessly by the stage. I took the microphone from his hand again. This time, I didn't ask. He surrendered it without a word, his eyes wide. I turned to face the hundreds of curious, confused faces, a sea of wedding guests who were about to become witnesses. Thank you all for your patience, I began, my voice amplified, ringing through the vast room with perfect clarity. It was steady, devoid of the emotion they might have expected. There was a small medical misunderstanding, a brief moment of disorientation. My mother-in-law is recovering and will be perfectly fine. I paused, letting the lie settle, a final, calming lull before the storm. But her toast was cut short, and it made me realize we'd forgotten something in our program, a special wedding montage my husband and I wanted to share with you all. A few people smiled, relieved. A photo montage. This was familiar territory. Normal. I nodded to the band leader, who in turn nodded at a technician I had briefed earlier. The house lights dimmed. The large projection screen behind the stage, which had been displaying a static, elegant monogram of my and Nathan's initials, flickered to life. But there were no smiling childhood photos, no romantic shots of our engagement. The first image was a high-definition, time-stamped feed from the corner of the room, my photographer's angle. It showed Loretta approaching me, champagne flutes in hand. The second image appeared in a split screen, this one slightly shaky, the angle lower, the feed from the pen in the best man's father's pocket. A third screen joined them, the wide angle from the main wedding videographer. 3 different perspectives, one single, unfolding truth. The video played in clinical, damning silence. The room held its breath. They watched as Loretta leaned in, her body momentarily obscuring the glasses. But my photographer's angle was perfect. It caught the slight, deliberate tilt of her hand. The video froze, then zoomed in. A collective, audible gasp swept across the ballroom as everyone saw it. A faint, crystalline powder catching the light as it fell into the golden liquid of my glass. The montage continued, cutting rapidly between the angles. My turn. The embrace with my aunt. The swift, fluid exchange of the glasses. My lipstick marking the poisoned chalice. It was undeniable. A perfectly choreographed ballet of betrayal and counter-betrayal. The final frame was a slow-motion close-up from the pen camera. It lingered on Loretta raising the glass, my glass, with my lipstick stain, to her lips. The image froze there for 3 long, silent seconds. The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the projector. I lifted the microphone. My voice cut through the silence, sharp and precise. Tonight, the glasses weren't the only thing that was switched. I let the words hang in the air. So was the data. On cue, the image on the screen shattered. The wedding scene vanished, replaced by a rapid-fire sequence of corporate graphics. First, a chart from the Caro Dynamics servers, showing a perfect, unbroken line of green. The title read, Cold Chain Integrity Report, Q2. Then, another chart flashed, this one jagged and full of red spikes and alarming dips. The title, Raw Sensor Data, Q2. The file name, Orchid, blinked in the corner of the screen like a warning light. Customer and patient information was blurred out, a deliberate act of surgical precision. For the past 18 months, I announced, my voice ringing with the authority of absolute fact, Caro Dynamics has been falsifying its temperature control logs for sensitive medical shipments. What you are seeing is the proof. The screen continued its assault, flashing internal emails, clips from audio recordings. A corporate horror film played out in 30 seconds. As of 10 minutes ago, I declared, raising my voice to project over the rising wave of shocked whispers. A complete, unredacted set of these documents was delivered to the SEC and the FDA. A fully independent, off-site backup is secure and has already been verified by a third-party legal team. A man in the front row, a distinguished older gentleman in a tailored suit, stood up. It was Arthur Vance, the hotel's chief legal counsel, a man whose invitation I had personally overseen. He was not a wedding guest. He was a legal asset. For the record, he stated, his voice the powerful baritone of a seasoned litigator, I have been asked to announce that all claims being presented by Ms. Redding this evening are accompanied by a full and verifiable dossier of evidence, including time-stamped audio-visual recordings, original, unaltered server logs, and sworn affidavits. From the back of the room, I saw Claire, Loretta's assistant, finally spring to life. Her face was white with panic. She made a desperate dash for the sound and video technician's booth, intending to pull the plug, to kill the feed. But she was too late. The technician simply showed her his hands, held up in surrender. The feed wasn't coming from his system. It was being routed from a laptop on the bandstand, a laptop that was now displaying a single, taunting message on its screen. Access denied. June's handiwork. The game was over. The narrative was mine. The sound in the room had transformed. The initial shocked whispers had coalesced into a dead, profound silence, and then a new light began to fill the dim ballroom, not from the chandeliers, but from below, one by one, then in dozens, then in a flood. The small rectangular screens of smartphones were raised, their lenses all pointed at me. They were no longer guests. They were the press. They were the jury. They were the world. And they were recording. I let my eyes sweep across the room, meeting the gaze of Caro board members, investors, and family friends. Their faces were a mixture of horror, fascination, and cold calculation. The brand was broken. The family was exposed. I lifted the microphone for the final time. My voice was steady, a clear, ringing bell tolling the end of an era. "This wedding," I announced, letting the words land with their full weight, "will continue." A fresh wave of shocked silence. "Our vows are real. Our commitment is real." I paused, letting my eyes find Nathan as he emerged from the backstage door, his face pale but resolved, to stand beside me. "But our marriage will not be a shield for anyone's crimes." I placed the microphone gently on the stand. I did not need to say another word. The silent, glowing phones held aloft in the darkness said everything for me. I had turned a wedding reception into a press conference, and a toast into a testimony. The story was now public, and it was irreversible. The wedding reception was over. The party was dead. In its place, a corporate inquest had begun, conducted under the glittering, indifferent eyes of the crystal chandeliers. The guests, no longer participants, but spectators at a public execution, remained frozen in place, their phones held high, a forest of silent, glowing witnesses. My statement hung in the air, irrevocable. Nathan stood beside me, his hand finding mine, his grip firm and grounding. He was no longer the conflicted son. He was my husband, my ally. The pivot was complete. The silence was broken by movement from the head table. Two men rose and walked toward the stage with the grim, determined pace of surgeons approaching a critical patient. The first was Marcus Caro, Nathan's uncle. He was a silver-haired, stoic man who sat on the board as a legacy appointment, his face a roadmap of weary family duty. The second was Eleanor Vance, the board's lead independent director, a sharp, hawk-nosed woman in her late 60s, known for her ruthless adherence to corporate governance. She was the one I had been counting on. They didn't run. They ascended the low steps to the stage, creating a small, insulated zone of authority amidst the chaos. Eleanor Vance addressed me first, her voice low but caring, devoid of any sentiment. "Ms. Redding, you have made a series of extraordinary allegations." "I have made a series of factual statements," I corrected her, my tone just as level. "And I have the evidence to prove them." I reached into my purse and produced a small, silver USB drive. It was cool and solid in my hand. "This is an encrypted drive containing a complete mirror of the data I sent to the regulatory agencies, along with the unedited audio and video files from this evening. It is for the board." Marcus Caro reached for it, his face etched with a deep, familial pain. "Give it to me, Ava." "No," Eleanor Vance said sharply. Putting a hand on his arm, she looked at me. "The chain of custody is now critical. The password?" "It's the date," I said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Today's date, the day I married into this family." I handed the drive to Eleanor. Her cool, dry fingers brushed against mine. She understood the symbolism immediately. The key to unlock the corporation's crimes was the very event designed to cement its legacy. As this exchange happened, a tremor of a different kind was running through another part of the room. I saw David Cho, the chief financial officer, huddled near the exit, his phone pressed to his ear. His face, already pale, lost all remaining color. He began to sweat, his eyes darting around the room like a cornered animal. Though I couldn't hear the conversation, I knew exactly what he was being told. My digital escrow, upon activation by June, had done more than just release the data to my lawyers. It had also triggered a secondary protocol I'd embedded in their system, a legal preservation hold that immediately and completely locked down the financial servers. Internal audit was now looking at a digital brick wall. They couldn't alter a single byte of data. They couldn't delete a file. They couldn't clean a thing. The crime scene was hermetically sealed. Nathan stepped forward then, a new, steely authority in his posture. He took the microphone from the stand. "I need to say something." He looked out at the sea of phones, his family's friends, his company's investors. "I was unaware of the specifics of these discrepancies, but I will not hide from them." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room until it landed on Marcus and Eleanor. "I, Nathan Caro, will cooperate fully and transparently with any and all investigations. My bride, Ava Redding Caro, will be by my side throughout this process. Her evidence is my evidence. Her truth is my truth." It was a declaration of allegiance that was also a declaration of war against his mother's regime. As if summoned by his words, Loretta reappeared from the backstage corridor. She was no longer being supported. She was being flanked by her sister, a pale, trembling woman. The benzodiazepine was still in her system, leaving her unsteady, but her eyes were lucid with a cold, desperate fury. She had heard everything. She walked until she was at the foot of the stage, looking up at us. "Everything I did," she said, her voice a raw, ragged whisper that was somehow more chilling than a shout, "was for this company, to protect it, to protect all of you." Her gaze swept over the board members, the shareholders. It was a final, desperate appeal to their shared self-interest. I stepped to the edge of the stage, looking down at her, the bride in white, looking down at the matriarch in midnight blue. "A company built on lies is worthless. Loretta," I said, my voice cutting through her appeal. "A company is only as strong as its truth." "This is family business," Marcus Caro interjected, his voice strained. "It ceased to be family business the moment it endangered public health and violated federal law." Eleanor Vance snapped back, her authority absolute. She turned to the hotel's legal counsel, Arthur Vance, who had remained standing. "Arthur, I am officially convening an emergency session of the Caro Dynamics Board of Directors. Your hotel's Hemlock Suite will serve as our temporary boardroom. You will act as an independent witness to all proceedings, beginning with the documentation and sealing of this evidence." Arthur nodded grimly. "The room is secure. I will attest to the chain of custody." The corporate machine was now in motion, grinding forward with an impersonal, unstoppable force that was far more powerful than any family loyalty. But another, faster machine was already ahead of it. From a table near the front, a well-known activist investor, a corporate raider named Julian Croft, had not just been recording. He had been live-streaming the entire event to his private network of traders and analysts. His commentary, a low, predatory whisper, was now being broadcast across the financial world. "A total implosion at the top," he was murmuring to his phone. "Evidence of systemic fraud presented by the bride. The son just turned on the mother. Trading will be halted within minutes." As if on cue, a notification flashed on his screen. He angled the phone so his viewers could see it. It was a bright red banner from a market data provider. The letters were stark and final. "Trading halted. CRW, pending news." The word of the company's collapse had hit the market before the board had even sat down. Eleanor Vance wasted no time. She turned back to me, holding the USB drive like a holy relic. Arthur will draft the evidence submission forms. We will need your signature. She then looked at Nathan, her expression unreadable. And yours? Arthur Vance was already prepared, pulling folded documents from his briefcase as if he were a magician. The ballroom floor had become a notary's office. He presented the first document to me. It was a source declaration and whistleblower protection affirmation. It legally identified me as the source of the data and formally placed me under the protections afforded to corporate whistleblowers. I signed it with the same pen Nathan and I had used to sign our marriage license just hours earlier. My signature was clear and steady. Then, Arthur placed a second document in front of Nathan. "Mr. Caro," he said, his tone formal. "This is a revocation of familial proxy and a delegation of independent media authority. It legally severs your authority to speak or act on behalf of the corporation from your mother's. It states that all your future communications will be as an independent officer of the company, not as a representative of the Caro family interest. Do you understand?" Nathan looked at the document, then up at me. This was the final cut. The legal severing of the cord. He was no longer just Loretta's son. He was his own man, his own legal entity. He took the pen from my hand. "Perfectly," he said, and he signed his name. A bold, defiant stroke that signed away his past and signed up for an uncertain, but honest, future. The press would later call it the wedding pivot, the moment the Caro dynasty heir officially chose his bride over his mother, and integrity over the family brand. The Hemlock Suite was no longer a backstage storeroom. It had become a tribunal. The long mahogany table, usually reserved for mundane hotel business, was now the bench for the summary judgment of a corporate dynasty. Eleanor Vance sat at the head, the USB drive placed squarely in front of her like a gavel. Marcus Caro sat to her right, his face a mask of weary resignation. Nathan and I sat opposite them, and at the far end of the table, Loretta was slumped in a chair, her sister hovering behind her, the chemical fog slowly lifting to reveal the stark, barren landscape of her defeat. The hotel's lawyer, Arthur Vance, stood by the door, his presence transforming the room into a legally binding theater. The Caro family's lead counsel, a slick, reptilian man named Elias Croft, finally arrived, breathless and flustered. He immediately tried to take control, his voice an oily balm of attempted damage control. "Eleanor, this is a private family matter, exacerbated by what is clearly a moment of profound emotional distress for all involved. Perhaps we should table this discussion until—" "We will do no such thing, Elias," Eleanor cut him off, her voice like chipping ice. "We are in the midst of a material event with catastrophic implications for the company. There is no tabling this." Croft shifted his attack. He turned his gaze on me. "Ms. Redding, I'm sure in the light of day you will realize the gravity of these baseless slanders. However, we must address the immediate legal realities. Given the public nature of this unfortunate episode, a clear moral scandal has occurred, as per the prenuptial agreement you signed, specifically Clause 48B. He was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Arthur Vance opened it to admit a woman in a sharply tailored gray suit, her hair pulled back in a severe, elegant knot. She carried a leather portfolio and moved with an aura of unshakable, calm competence. "Apologies for the interruption," she said, her eyes scanning the room and assessing the power dynamics in a single, sweeping glance. "I'm Sarah Adler. I'm Ms. Redding's personal counsel." A flicker of surprise, then irritation, crossed Elias Croft's face. He was no longer the only lawyer in the room. "Ms. Adler walked to my side, placing a hand briefly on my shoulder before turning her attention to the table. "Mr. Croft," she began, her voice calm and measured. "I'm glad you brought up the prenuptial agreement. I have a copy right here. While you seem to be focused on Clause 48B, I'd like to draw the board's attention to a lesser-known, but far more relevant, provision, Clause 14B. She opened her portfolio and produced a copy of the agreement, already tabbed to the correct page. She read aloud, her voice a precise, legal instrument. Clause 14B. In the event that any party to this agreement is found to have willfully and with malicious intent orchestrated, fabricated, or induced a situation, including but not limited to acts of defamation, slander, or the administration of a noxious substance, with the express purpose of creating a pretext to trigger the conditions of Clause 48B, then this entire prenuptial agreement shall be rendered immediately and irrevocably null and void. She looked up, letting the words settle in the suffocating silence of the room. A poison pill, she added with a slight cold smile, for a poison plot. Loretta, who had been staring blankly at the table, looked up, her eyes wide with disbelief. She turned to Elias Croft. That wasn't in the draft I reviewed. It was in the final version you signed, Ms. Adler stated calmly. All eyes in the room turned to me, then to Nathan. Eleanor Vance leaned forward, her gaze sharp as a raptor's. Who, she asked, the single word a demand, authorized the inclusion of that clause? Nathan took a deep breath. The moment had come. He did not look at his mother. He looked at me, and then at his lawyer. Ms. Adler. I did, he said, his voice clear and steady. I authorized it. I instructed Ms. Adler to add it to the final draft before it was sent to my mother for signature. Marcus Caro stared at his nephew, aghast. Nathan, why? Because it was an insurance policy, Nathan answered, finally turning his gaze to his uncle, a deep, sorrowful shame in his eyes. An insurance policy for Ava, because I knew my mother was capable of trying to orchestrate a scandal if she ever felt Ava was a threat. I didn't know what form it would take, but I knew she needed a defense against a weapon she wouldn't even know was being aimed at her. The confession hung in the air, more damning than anything I had presented on the screen. It was an indictment not of a single action, but of a lifetime of character. Ms. Adler pressed the advantage, her logic relentless. The evidence presented this evening is unequivocal. The time-stamped video footage of the switched glasses, which constitutes the administration of a noxious substance, and the scheduled email to the press, which constitutes a prefabricated act of defamation, provide clear and irrefutable proof of willful and malicious intent. Loretta Caro's actions were designed specifically to create a pretext to trigger Clause 48B. Therefore, as per the terms of Clause 14B, which she herself signed, the prenuptial agreement is void. Elias Croft sank back into his chair, speechless. The trap, so carefully constructed by his client and her legal team, had not just failed, it had snapped shut on its creator. Which means, I said, speaking for the first time since my lawyer had arrived, that my wedding gift, the block of Caro Dynamics shares promised to me upon marriage, remains mine, and my legal standing as a whistleblower, with full access to and the right to speak about the data I've uncovered, is unimpeachable. Eleanor Vance nodded slowly, a grim finality in her expression. The legal trap was sprung. Now came the corporate fallout. We will now vote, she announced, her voice leaving no room for debate. A motion to temporarily suspend Loretta Caro from her duties as chairman and CEO, pending a full internal and federal investigation. All in favor? Eleanor raised her hand. Marcus Caro, his face a portrait of agony, hesitated for a moment, looked at his sister-in-law, and then slowly, painfully, raised his own. The motion passed. I will assume the role of interim CEO, effective immediately, Eleanor declared. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. And it seems David Cho has just tendered his resignation as CFO, citing immediate and pressing health concerns. She looked up, her eyes cold. His network access has been suspended, and his office is being sealed. The Caro dynasty, which had stood for 50 years, had been decapitated in less than an hour. Loretta's ultimate weapon, the infamous moral scandal clause, had become the primary piece of evidence proving her own conspiracy and malicious intent. In the ensuing quiet, as Eleanor began dictating instructions to her assistant over the phone, I turned to Nathan. The room was full of people, but in that moment, it was just the two of us. I had to know. The powder, I asked, my voice low. Did you know anything about the powder? He met my gaze without flinching. His eyes were full of pain, but also a raw, devastating honesty. No, Ava, I swear to you, I knew nothing about that. If I had, I would have stopped it. He paused, his voice dropping to a near whisper. But I knew my mother. I knew what she was capable of, the manipulation, the ruthlessness. I knew she would try to control you, to break you if she felt she had to. Adding that clause, it was the only way I could think of to protect you without starting a war I knew I couldn't win. It was cowardly, but it was all I had. It was the truth, a painful, complicated truth, but the truth nonetheless. I believed him. I stood up, drawing the attention of the room once more. One final thing, I said, looking directly at Arthur Vance, who was taking meticulous notes. For the official minutes of this meeting, I want it recorded that the bride did not consume any alcohol this evening. My champagne glass, which the catering manager can attest to, contained only sparkling apple cider. It was the final, brutal twist of the knife. Loretta's meticulously crafted narrative, the drunken, hysterical bride having a public meltdown, was not just disproven, it was rendered an absurdity. The foundation of her entire plot was a lie, and I had just entered the proof of that lie into the official corporate record. The machine she had built to smear me had broken down, its gears choked on the very poison it was designed to dispense. The trap had not just snapped shut, it had devoured itself. We left the Hemlock Suite and stepped back into the world we had just shattered. The journey from the backstage corridor to the center of the ballroom was the longest walk of my life. The air was different now. The thick, cloying tension had broken, replaced by a strange, humming stillness. The quiet that follows a lightning strike. The guests hadn't left, not a single one. They stood in small, silent clusters, their champagne flutes held forgotten at their sides. They were no longer guests at a wedding. They were observers at the scene of a cataclysm, held in place by a morbid, magnetic curiosity. The band, taking their cue from some unseen force of social intuition, had abandoned their upbeat jazz numbers. They were playing a slow, mournful ballad, a melody that felt less like a celebration and more like a requiem for a fallen dynasty. Nathan's hand was a warm, solid presence in the small of my back. We didn't speak. We walked past the tables, past the faces that stared at us with a mixture of awe, pity, and fear. We were no longer the happy couple. We were something far more complex, a matched set of survivors who had just burned down their own house to kill the monster in the walls. We stopped at the edge of the dance floor. The stage was empty now, the microphone standing alone like a sentinel. I didn't need it anymore. I walked to the head table, now a scene of disarray with abandoned napkins and half-empty glasses. I picked up my own glass, the one I had placed so carefully on the waiter's tray. The sparkling apple cider was still cool, its bubbles still rising in a slow, steady stream. I held it up, not high in a gesture of triumph, but at eye level, a simple offering. My voice, when I spoke, was not amplified, but it carried through the profound silence with perfect clarity. "I'd like to propose a final toast," I said. Every eye was on me. I saw Loretta then, standing near the grand entrance with her sister. She was watching me, her face a pale, ravaged mask. The drug had ebbed, but the defeat was a more potent poison, and it was flooding her system. "This is not a toast to love or to legacy," I continued, my gaze sweeping across the room before finally settling on her. "This is a toast to transparency." I took a slow, deliberate sip from my glass. The cider was sweet and clean on my tongue. Then, I did something no one expected. I walked off the dance floor, moving through the silent crowd, directly toward Loretta. People parted before me as if I were royalty, or perhaps a specter. Her sister tried to step in front of her, a weak, protective gesture, but Loretta waved her away. We stood face to face, the bride in white and the deposed queen in blue. The air between us crackled with the energy of our silent, brutal war. A waiter passed by with a tray of fresh glasses and pitchers of ice water. I stopped him. I took a clean, empty glass, filled it with water, and offered it to my mother-in-law. She stared at the glass, then at me. Her hand trembled as she reached out. For a moment, I thought she might slap it away, that some final, defiant spark of her old self would ignite, but there was nothing left to burn. Her fingers, cool and limp, closed around the glass. She accepted it. It was a surrender, a final, unconditional capitulation. I leaned in, my voice low, meant only for her, but in the tomb-like silence of the room, the words carried like a stage whisper. "I don't seek revenge with chemicals, Loretta," I said, my voice devoid of malice, a simple statement of fact. "I seek it with the truth." Her eyes, which had commanded boardrooms and terrified rivals, were now just the eyes of a tired, broken woman. A tear she would have once considered a fatal weakness traced a path down her cheek, leaving a faint, glistening trail through her perfect makeup. "You just destroyed a family," she whispered, her voice a dry, rustling sound. It was her last gambit, the final, pathetic appeal to a sentiment she herself had never honored. I did not let it land. I countered immediately, my voice still low, but sharp as a diamond cutter. "I just saved a company from being sold for parts. I saved your employees' jobs and your husband's real legacy. The family you're talking about was just a brand name for a criminal enterprise, and the brand is dead." I held her gaze for a moment longer, letting her absorb the full, devastating scope of her loss. Then, I turned away. Nathan was there. He had followed me across the room. He placed his hand on my back again, a silent, steady anchor. He looked at Loretta. A flicker of something. Pity, sorrow, a final painful goodbye, in his eyes. Then he turned to the room, to the hundreds of silent observers. He nodded his head once, a gesture of profound, weary acknowledgement. "Thank you," he said, his voice resonating with a strength I had never heard before. "Thank you for bearing witness." And then, the strangest thing happened. Someone began to clap. It wasn't the wild, celebratory applause of a wedding toast. It was a single, solid sound. Then another joined, and another. It was a slow, steady, rhythmic applause. It was not a sound of joy. It was a sound of affirmation, of respect. It was the sound of a verdict being rendered, a short, sharp, final judgment, like a gavel striking a block, a full stop. The applause died down as quickly as it had begun, leaving another profound silence in its wake. My work here was done. I saw the MC hovering near the stage, and I shook my head slightly. There would be no more speeches, no cake cutting, no first dance. I took Nathan's hand. I gave the stage, the ballroom, the entire shattered evening back to the band, who, after a moment of uncertainty, began to play another soft, instrumental piece. It was time to go. We walked toward the grand exit. Hand in hand, we didn't look back. As we passed through the ornate double doors, my photographer, the one who was truly mine, stepped forward. His flash went off. A single, brilliant burst of light that momentarily bleached the world white. In my mind, I saw the picture he had just taken, the two of us, the bride and groom, stepping out of the wreckage, our faces illuminated, our future a blank, unknown space, and behind us, in the grand ballroom, the camera of my memory pulled back, capturing the final, cinematic shot, the sea of silent, stunned faces, the abandoned head table, and the massive crystal chandelier, still swaying ever so slightly from the shockwave of the truth that had just been detonated beneath it. A final, framed image of the end and the beginning. The doors of the Hemlock Suite remained closed, but inside, the world had been remade, not with shouts, but with the dry scratch of a pen on heavy bond paper. The emergency board resolution was signed, dated, and witnessed. Eleanor Vance slid the document into a thick manila envelope, which Arthur Vance then sealed with a small, crimson disc of wax, pressing the hotel's official signet into it with a satisfying final thud. He held the sealed envelope up, showing the timestamp to all present before placing it into his locked briefcase. The chaos was over. The paperwork had begun. In my pocket, my burner phone gave a single, silent vibration. I pulled it out under the table. On the screen, a system notification from the scheduling service I'd used. The message was simple. Scheduled send to M. Vance cancelled. It was the kill switch I had preset. The condition, a verified upload from June's audio feed, confirming the words emergency session and board resolution. The public detonation was no longer necessary. The war had been won not by razing the city, but by capturing the palace. Burning the house down had always been a last resort, not the goal. The goal was a forced, orderly surrender, and I had just achieved it. I typed out one last message on the burner phone. It was an email addressed to Eleanor Vance's private account. The subject line read, Client Mitigation Protocol, Tier 1. The body of the email contained a single, encrypted file and its password. Inside that file was a comprehensive list of every client whose shipments had been compromised by the temperature failures, triaged by the sensitivity of the materials and the potential for public health impact. It was a roadmap for the first hours of her tenure as interim CEO, a way to begin the vital work of containing the damage and protecting the innocent. I looked across the table and caught her eye. She glanced down at her own phone, read the message, and gave me a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was an acknowledgement, a transfer of responsibility. I had not just torn the company down. I had given her the first brick to begin rebuilding it on a foundation of truth. The room was silent as Arthur Vance placed a final document on the table in front of Loretta. It was a voluntary, temporary abdication of her powers as chairman, a legal formality to smooth the transition until the full force of the regulatory investigations crashed down. For a long moment, she just stared at it. The fight had gone out of her, leaving behind a hollow, brittle shell. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, she sat up straight, her spine stiffening with a final, vestigial memory of her former power. She took the pen from Arthur and signed her name at the bottom of the page. Her signature, once a bold, aggressive slash, was now a thin, shaky scrawl. As she lifted the pen, the nail of her index finger, coated in a dark, blood-red lacquer, dragged across the polished surface of the mahogany table, leaving a thin white scratch in the wood, the only physical scar left by a woman who had built an empire on invisible wounds. The proceedings were over. People began to stand, the tension in the room finally dissipating. I stood as well, but I did not move toward the door. I walked around the table until I stood before her. She didn't look up. I waited. A moment later, a waiter, summoned by Arthur, entered with a tray to collect the used glasses. I stopped him and pointed to the one she had drunk from, the one with my crimson lipstick stain still visible on the rim. The evidence. He carefully placed it back on the table, directly in front of her, a silent, damning reminder. She finally raised her head. Her eyes were empty, all the fire extinguished. Redding, she said, her voice a dry whisper. She used my maiden name, a final, petty refusal to acknowledge me as family, as a Caro. You've won. I looked down at her, not with triumph, not with pity, but with a quiet, final clarity. No, I said, my voice as calm and steady as it had been all night. The truth won, as if on cue. Eleanor Vance opened the door to the Hemlock Suite. The sound of the ballroom, which had been a muffled, distant hum, now flowed into the sterile room like a cool, cleansing breeze. The band was still playing their soft, mournful ballad, the sound a gentle balm on the raw, open wounds of the evening. The air in the room stirred. The inquest was over. Nathan was waiting for me by the door. He held out his hand. I took it, my fingers lacing through his. We were a single, united entity. He squeezed my hand, a silent promise of the long, difficult road ahead, a road we would now walk together. We stepped out of the Hemlock Suite and into the corridor, leaving the wreckage of the old guard behind us. We walked past the stacked chairs and the coiled cables, toward the soft lights of the ballroom, toward the music, toward whatever came next. We did not look back. The camera of memory holds on the scene we left behind. It pushes past the departing board members, past the lawyers gathering their papers. It moves toward the long mahogany table, now empty except for a single, forgotten object sitting in the harsh fluorescent light, a lone champagne flute. On its crystal rim, a perfect crescent-shaped stain of crimson lipstick has now dried. No longer a kiss, but a scar. Black screen. The end. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're all tuning in from. So drop a comment below and let me know. Let me know your thoughts on what happened. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like. And if you really want to support the channel, hit that hype button to help this story reach more people.